Welcome to the Steel Creek Explorer. I'm your host, Jeremy Stout, and today let's learn about caves. All right, we've just made it through a tight, muddy crawl, and we've made it back into the room of this beautiful cave. No, I'm just kidding. This is actually the Nature Center's cave exhibit that you can explore yourself if you come crawl through during our open hours. But this is a great place to first learn about how caves form. And the name of the game is water. Water is responsible for the formation of caves. Both water takes away and water also gives back. Here in just a moment, we'll show you how you can actually dissolve rock using some household chemicals. But in a cave, it depends on what kind of rock you have in your local bedrock. So limestone and dolomite, we have lots of in this area. And that's one of those rocks that actually does dissolve in water over a long period of time. So that's what actually hollows out the rock spaces and creates the cave. But then you know that caves are also typified by the formations that you find inside them. These typically form from the flowing or dripping of water inside the cave. The water will actually leave minerals behind and forms these formations that we've come to know, like stalactites that hang from the ceiling, stalagmites that grow from the bottom, and if you have them meet in the middle, you might have the formation of a column. Those are all precipitated sediments, minerals that are left behind after water drips or flows from through the cave. So let's go ahead and head inside the Nature Center's lab and look at how these caves form. All right, well, we're down here in the Nature Center's classroom and lab, and we're here to do a simple experiment to show you some of these unique chemical properties of some of our local rocks. So as I mentioned, caves form from limestone or dolomite rock, those rocks that we call carbonate rocks, actually dissolving in time in water, in simple rainwater. So carbonate rocks are soluble in water over the course of thousands or millions of years. That's actually kind of unique, and that's not something shared by all of our local rocks. So here I have two rocks. Both of these came from Steel Creek Park. This is a chunk of the severe shale formation. This is what most of the interior of the park is made up of. This is the underlying bedrock that makes those really steep-sided knobs that typify our park. And then here in my left hand is a piece of the Knox dolomite. So this is a carbonate rock, and this is the home to one of our caves that you're going to meet in a few moments. So this is a simple experiment. You can do this at home if you've got some rocks and you'd like to know if those are carbonate rocks. Here's a good first test to see. What I have is a clear container, and that's not water in there. Yes, the dolomite would dissolve in water, but I don't think you want to sit here for the thousands of years it's going to take for it to dissolve. So what we have here is actually a household acid. This is a weak mixture of acidic acid, which we call vinegar. This is just plain distilled white vinegar that you'd find at the grocery store. And so if we take our shale, we drop it in the vinegar, and we'll let it sit in there. All right, so we just dropped in our piece of dolomite, and you see immediately a very different reaction. You actually see what almost looks like smoke or dust coming off that small rock, and bubbles. It is really starting to fizz. And so what you're seeing here is a classic acid-base reaction. Limestone, dolomite, and other carbonate rocks are actually pretty strong bases. Vinegar, of course, is an acid. And so acids and bases don't mix. And what's happening here is that this chunk of dolomite is actually dissolving in the vinegar. If we leave that in for a few days, then that rock could be gone completely within just a few hours or a couple of days. So enough talking about the geochemistry of caves. Let's get into the park and see some. Here we are at the park's Quarry Cave. We've learned a little bit about how caves form and some of the formations you can find inside them. We've done our hands-on experiment that you can try at home on dissolving some of these rocks yourself in your own kitchen. But here, before we go inside Quarry Cave, let's take a look at the outside. We've talked to you before about the geology of Steel Creek Park and geology in general. And I've already introduced you to this idea of sedimentary rocks. So all the rocks in the world, they're either sedimentary, metamorphic, or igneous. All of our park rocks and most of the rocks in our region in East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia are sedimentary. And that just means that they were laid down as sediments in some sort of depositional environment. Okay, so for instance, a sandy beach, if it's compacted and turned to stone, might become a sedimentary rock, sandstone. Well, this right here is dolomite. This is part of the Knox Formation, and dolomite is a marine rock. These are sediments made up of calcite, calcium carbonate, that have been laid down at the bottom of an ancient ocean. This dolomite was laid down in a period called the Ordovician period, a very, very long time ago. Most sedimentary rocks are laid down in layers. We call those strata. And typically, sedimentary layers are laid down originally horizontally. Okay? So that's one thing we talk about in sedimentary geology is original horizontality. Well, when you look at layers like right here, you say, well, these layers are anything but horizontal. So you see this especially when you drive down the road in our area, you look at rock cuts, the layers in this region are tilted up, they make rainbows and basins. You can even have geologic layers that have been flipped completely over as a result of the geologic and tectonic forces that have shaped our region. But here you can see the strata of this dolomite, the sedimentary rock, are tilted in this direction roughly about 45 degrees upward. And that's going to be important when we go inside in just a minute. Right inside the door of Quarry Cave, you can still see daylight behind me. We're not very far in. And right now, you can see, this is why I asked you to notice those, the orientation of those sedimentary layers outside. Because we've just come inside, and now you can see that this cave is oriented strongly, oh, what is that? Pretty close to about 45 degrees in this direction. Okay, that's no coincidence. Caves, as we've already learned, form from the solution of rock in water. And the caves typically form around their weakest points. And what is the weakest point in between two layers? Well, it's the gap. It's the place where the two layers meet. And so in sedimentary geology, it's the same way. So most of our caves in our region tend to follow the orientation of the layers themselves. And so if your layers are tilted at a strongly diagonal or oblique angle, your caves tend to form passages that follow that same deformation, that same orientation. And Quarry Cave is no exception. And even right inside the doorway, we've already started making some discoveries, and you can see this water right above my head, the droplets on this cave ceiling. This is a cave that's still active, it's still forming. As groundwater moves through the rock that's over our head, it comes down and finds little low points in the cave ceiling to form drips. We're not going to touch these, of course, because over a few tens of thousands of years, we might get cave formations. Stalactites could form here. And you can even see the beginnings of some little cave popcorn-like ceiling formations all around me. Let's go ahead and go a little bit deeper in. So Quarry Cave is a very small cave, at least the parts that are open today. So the entrance you have to kind of crouch to get into, as you saw, and then right inside the entrance, it actually gets over 6 feet tall. You can stand up inside. But then the cave takes a noticeable shortened ceiling and becomes a crawl. So we'll go ahead and take you to the back room of the Quarry Cave so you can see a little bit further back than where typically the folks on most of our public tours end up. Let's go check it out. Okay, so we're only about 40 feet from the entrance that we just came inside, and already we've essentially reached the end of our road. This is what we call the back room of Quarry Cave, when in reality you actually see it continues going, although it goes off in some directions that, to say the least, are not very comfortable for any human of human size to go explore. Maybe we'll go check this one out in just a second. But you can see that this is actually, of course, this is rock above our head, but what makes our cave floor here is just soil. And so this cave has actually been filling with sediment over time, and it appears to be coming from this passageway right here. There must be, of course, this is a larger cave system, and water is moving through the cave system and transporting with it sediments that are coming down this passageway to my left, and is slowly choking off the cave with sediment. These are sediments that come from some other undisclosed location in Steel Creek Park. So this is essentially the back room of Quarry Cave. And even here we can find litter. It's hard to say if this is from someone who came in the front door like we did, or if this is litter that's actually washed in from wherever this sediment comes from. Even when you're underground, you can find undesirable signs of human occupation. We're past the main room. This is the passage I just showed you. I'm just going to push it a little bit just to give you an idea of the kind of space that we're dealing with in here, and see if maybe I can peek around the corner and see what's on the other side. Who knows? Could be another room to Quarry Cave. All right, so said it before, I need to say it again. Caves are wonderful places to find diverse and fascinating wildlife. So the cave environment is very stable. It's very secure. It's roughly the same temperature year-round. It's humid year-round. It's typically gets the same amount of wind or not at all year-round. The microenvironment is very stable, so it's a great place for wildlife if they can tolerate the dark. Caves are the only place in the world where you can get true and total dark. If you think about that, even the deepest ocean trenches, you actually have organisms that have adapted huge eyes to allow tiny bits of light in. In caves, you've got the opposite. You've got organisms that have adapted to having no eyes at all. They've adapted to blindness because the cave environment has no light except for the light that we bring in. So if the animals can get by without light, they can find a lot of interesting resources in caves. So here we have a number of flies that are flying around. Those are called cave flies. But we've also got all this material that was brought in by a critter that's often called a pack rat, but it actually goes by a truer name, which is called the Allegheny wood rat, is who probably did this. Oh, it could be a couple of other rodent species as well, but they form these middens where they find these little tucked away places back in caves, and they make their little home, and this is the remains of one of those nests behind. Something I haven't found today that I usually find in this cave are camel crickets, which are oftentimes called cave crickets, but they're actually called camel crickets. You might be familiar with those. Some people are horrified of them, unnecessarily. You find them in basements a lot and in garages. Those are those really large humpbacked crickets with the big back legs. Totally harmless, but they do really well in this environment as well. All right, well, this is a wonderful find right here in Steel Creek Park. Here we have the aptly named cave salamander, Eurycia lucifuga. As the name would suggest, this salamander is found almost exclusively associated with caves, fissures, sinkholes, and other what we call karst topography. Karst topography just refers to solutional rock features like we're talking about here, caves, sinkholes, and fissures. This is a salamander, not to be confused with the Tennessee blind cave salamander. That's a different species that occurs nearby, but not in Steel Creek Park. This is the cave salamander that's not blind, but it does get by just fine in the dark and in these moist cave-like environments. What a great find to find here in Quarry Cave. So we've experienced a wild cave today, and we've made some pretty cool discoveries along the way. But one thing I want to mention, and I really want to stress, is safety, okay? Not just safety for you, but safety for caves of our region and our nation, frankly. One thing I didn't even mention in this episode, but it deserves mention here, is that our caves, and especially our bat populations nationwide, are under attack right now from an invasive fungal infection. You may have heard of it. It's called white nose syndrome. It appears to have made its way over to North America, probably from some cavers that came here from Europe. It's threatening bat populations nationwide. So for that reason, I don't recommend going into any wild cave. And of course, caves can be very dangerous for our own species as well. So for those two reasons, I say stay out of wild caves. There are plenty of ways, though, for you to experience caves in the real world. We've got a number of commercial caves right here in the immediate Bristol area. We've also got a number of adventure groups that will tour some wild caves that have already been heavily exploited by cavers. Try those avenues out. Or of course, if you didn't like the tight space I was in earlier, come to the Nature Center. You can explore a cave there without having to worry about too tight of crawls and not being able to get out. But wherever you're at, do come to Steel Creek Park. You don't have to get dirty when you come, but this is where you can be the explorer.
All right, back here we found a narrow opening. I'm going to try to push it.
I'm just kidding. We're in the Nature Center's play cave.